the Denver Broncos offense find a way to get right against the Dallas Cowboys? Did Aaron Gordon's historic opening night mask some warts that are potentially starting to form within the Denver Nuggets? And do the Colorado Avalanche, fresh off of a shootout loss to the throwback Carolina Hurricanes, officially have an exposable weakness? All things to come on today's rundown, coming to you live from the Denver Sports 1043 The Fan social channels. Like and subscribe to our YouTube page at Denver Sports 1043. You can catch us live every weekday at noon on the Denver Sports 1043 The Fan X platform, as well as Facebook Live. It is a football Friday, but boy, oh boy, do we have a basketball game to react to today. The Denver Nuggets, in their season opener against the Golden State Warriors at the Chase Center in Northern California, had a situation where a historic night from Aaron Gordon is wasted and spoiled by some heroic comeback efforts from Stephen Curry. But man, to not take a moment, even in a loss, and recognize what we just witnessed from Aaron Gordon, I would be remiss to let that happen. 50 points from AG, tossing in 8 boards, a couple assists, 17 of 21 from the field, and how about this? 10 of 11 from behind the arc, and a perfect 6 for 6 from the charity stripe. His 105.8 true shooting percentage against the Warriors makes it the most efficient 50-point game in NBA history. This is coming off of a postseason where Aaron Gordon had the latest game-winning tip-in the history of the National Basketball Association to help the Clippers, or the Nuggets, advance beyond the Clippers in round 1 of the Western playoffs. And then, on basically one leg with a grade 2 hamstring strain, helps the Nuggets push the Oklahoma City Thunder, the eventual champions, with the regular season MVP, scoring champion, and finals MVP Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to a Game 7 in ultimately what went on to be their first champion season in franchise history. Aaron Gordon has undergone a transformation in the last couple of seasons that someday will be studied by scientists. His ability to reinvent himself as an NBA player entering his 30s and become a player who, as a shooter, had an inside game with a middling jump shot and certainly was not a threat beyond the arc, to somebody who is shooting north of 90% in his opening game of the 2025 season beyond the arc, and creating a spacing and floor situation where the Denver Nuggets have unlocked a legitimate anywhere on the court weapon, is something that I think cannot be understated. The Joker ties Oscar Robertson with his 4th career season opening triple-double, something that I expect he will break literally in the game opener of the 2026-2027 season. But for now, the Joker with a pedestrian-esque triple-double by his standards, 21 points, 13 rebounds, and 10 assists. That was probably enough to cover up what I thought was a surprising and a little bit disappointing element of Joker's season opening game. 2 for 13 from beyond the arc. Did not look comfortable, did not look smooth or pretty, trying to shoot the 3 ball, trying to will the Nuggets back into the game as Golden State clearly salvaged and took a hold of the momentum in the contest leading into the final period and overtime. Steph Curry scoring 17 points from the final, essentially 3 minutes of the game into the overtime period, outscoring the entire Denver Nuggets as a team in that situation during that time span. We also got to see the debuts of a handful of very promising and highly touted Denver Nuggets and Cam Johnson, who struggled overall shooting from the field. Jonas Valanciunas coming in relief as a bench player behind Nikola Jokic, the first rendition of the backup big dynamic that we will see between the two big Balkans. And I thought Jonas Valanciunas looked pretty decent. He was efficient with the ball, 4 or 5 from the field, added a few boards, added some assists. And overall, I think showed potential to be able to spell Jokic in bigger opportunities throughout the season. But it didn't really happen in this game because the Joker still played 41 minutes on the night. And I would certainly hope and expect that with the emphasis that Ben Tenzer and Jonathan Wallace placed on the bolstering and the development of a Nuggets bench that is filled with savvy veterans who can handle their own in the non-Jokic minutes, the expectation would be that that number in terms of minutes played for Nikola dips down below that 40 mark on a consistent, if not nightly basis during big stretches of the regular season. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., who was about 50% shooting from the field, added a couple of triples. Certainly, in my opinion, didn't show anything overly concerning in terms of what he's going to be able to contribute as a spot shooter and scorer coming off of the bench. Bruce Brown, it was interesting and fun to see Bruce Brown still showing some of that defensive grit and tenacity and intensity that we saw from him and became such a hallmark of his game during the title season a handful of years ago. Overall, I know it was a loss for the Nuggets. They gave up a pretty sizable lead that they had maintained for the majority of the contest. I think they went ahead 10-8 against the Golden State Warriors and then never looked back until the waning portion of the second half when Steph Curry just kind of took over and did Steph Curry things. They got big contributions from Al Horford, Jimmy Butler hitting a dagger bucket in overtime that made it so that the Nuggets were basically too little too late in terms of a comeback effort. And you had an interesting decision, I think, from David Adelman as a coaching perspective in his head coaching debut on how to handle the game flow and manage the possessions in overtime and even in the final minutes of regulation, which seemed to be predominantly reliant upon the age-old two-man game between Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. Jamal poured in 20-plus points in his season debut as well. Looked a little frustrated late in the game, certainly in the fourth quarter, with some misses from beyond the arc, although he eventually had a few come through in situations that helped the Nuggets keep it tight. But it was interesting when you have a night where Aaron Gordon almost literally couldn't miss. 10 of 11 from beyond the arc and 17 of 21 overall from the field. And yet he gets one touch, essentially, in the final couple of minutes of overtime or of regulation and into overtime. And his one touch was a made three-pointer to help answer a Stephen Curry basket on the other end. And that's kind of a situation where I think you look at that and say, why not feed the beast? Why not ride the hot hand? Aaron Gordon, without a doubt, is responsible for some of my most joyous sports memories in recent years, whether they happened in the postseason or in a championship setting or just on a general game-to-game basis throughout the season. Aaron Gordon, Mr. Nugget, is one of my all-time favorite Denver and Colorado sports athletes. And I think that on what was a historic night for him, I certainly am not going to overemphasize a coaching decision by David Adelman, who has just as much of a right as anybody to kind of use this first couple of games of the season, which the Warriors had a game head start to work out some kinks and get themselves into a rhythm. Steph Curry talked about that on the broadcast and being able to have a leg up going into this game as they continue to kind of look at their revamped lineup with Al Horford kind of joining the mix in what is becoming kind of a swan song potentially for Stephen Curry in the back 3 or 4 holes of his NBA career, at which clearly, as he showed with 42 points last night, he's not slowing down anytime soon. It was noticeable to me, too, on a small aside about Steph Curry, how quickly he can still get to the cup, man. He was driving and moving with the basketball, even without the basketball, at a speed and smoothness that I think for someone who is north of 35 years old in the NBA is pretty special. And yet, the Nuggets did, despite a poor shooting night from Nikola Jokic, especially beyond the arc, despite Christian Brown being held to low single digits from a scoring output perspective, despite Cam Johnson in his first game sliding in the Michael Porter Jr. role, struggling, the Nuggets did almost everything they needed to do to win that game for 3.5 quarters. And it just fell apart at the end. And Golden State seized the opportunity once they had leveled the tide and forced overtime. Jokic missing a bunny of a shot from inside of 10 feet that I think 9.5 times out of 10 just drops for him with the way that he's perfected that high arcing shot motion. the Nuggets are going to have plenty of time to figure things out. I expect Cam Johnson to struggle from a shooting perspective in the early portion of this 2025 NBA season. I think that him sliding into Michael Porter Jr.'s role, and most importantly, playing in an offense with Nikola Jokic, where there really is no downtime or off moment, is an adjustment for him that is not just going to click immediately. We saw it in the preseason where Jokic, who's halfway across the court, is whipping Cam Johnson a no-look curved ball pass to the outlet for a corner three. And Cam Johnson almost looked like he wasn't ready for it because he's not used to having that kind of offensive floor general at his disposal. And I think that I believe in Cam Johnson's shooting ability. I believe in his ability as a shot creator and a ball mover to have the offense move and flow through him more smoothly. It just might take 10, 15 games or so to really start clicking at a high level. And I think the Nuggets are talented enough as a roster overall to help ease through that transitionary process. I'd like to see Jonas Valanciunas maybe a little bit more aggressive, hunting for his shot and deployed with larger stretches to keep Jokic's minutes under that 40-minute threshold, if and when at all possible, to make sure that the Joker is fresh and energized and ready to go throughout the slug of an 82-game regular season. And we'll see how the rest of the bench unit kind of begins to coalesce. And as David Adelman gets a little bit more sand underneath his toes to be able to command and manage the minutia and the micro moments and elements within the game, the way that Michael Malone had on autopilot for a number of years, given the way that he had been able to keep the core together for as long as he was able to. But Aaron Gordon, man, listen. Like I said earlier, Aaron Gordon's development in the last 2 to 3 seasons as a pure shooter at the NBA level almost defies science. It is something that I think will be studied and remembered years from now as a, hey, remember when Aaron Gordon, who had a clearly defined style as a member of the Orlando Magic, then comes over to Denver in what I think is the greatest trade in Nuggets franchise history, and then accepts his role as a fourth option with a defensive-minded mentality, taking on the number one defensive assignment for every single team en route to their postseason run to a Larry O'Brien trophy. And then, as the team continues to mold and evolve post-championship, finding a way to increase his shooting percentage across every level, from free throws to mid-range to beyond the arc, and make himself a truly multifaceted, dynamic basketball player at both ends of the court, and carry the mantle of being the number one scoring option on a number of occasions when called upon to do so, in addition to taking on point responsibilities from Nikola Jokic and leading the offense to give the Nuggets opportunities to provide better looks without Jokic as the primary ball handler. It's amazing. It can't be understated how vital and important Aaron Gordon's role has been and the way it has evolved and allowed the Nuggets to continue to maintain competitive offensive basketball, a revolving door of complementary pieces around the Joker in the years since they've won the title and the year that they won it. And I think if the Nuggets are going to return to the NBA Finals, which I expect them to in this 2025 season, the performance that we saw from Aaron Gordon tonight and his ability to maintain that threat from an opposing defense is going to be key in doing so. Shifting gears to the Denver Broncos, who have a pretty big game on the docket this weekend on their throwback weekend of their own, as we saw with the Avalanche, who we'll get to in a minute. I don't know if it was intentional or otherwise, but this is a jersey matchup that is reminiscent of a Super Bowl that did not go well for the Denver Broncos back in the day, and maybe some reverse juju here coming in that regard. I think they're certainly going to hope that's the case as Javonte Williams comes back to town and is the architect of one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL, something that he didn't sniff when he was a member of the Denver Broncos. So certainly hoping that there's some reversal of fortune in that regard. But when you're looking at this Broncos-Cowboys matchup from a macro perspective, zooming out a little bit and factoring in context that we've received about the Broncos and digested over the last 7 weeks, this feels like a significant matchup for the Broncos in one regard. I think this is do or die time for Sean Payton and the Broncos offense to decide whether or not they can and have it within themselves to truly commit to running the football and maintaining that competitive offensive balance that they didn't have last season. The Dallas Cowboys have the worst total defense in the NFL in 2025, and they are bottom 3 in the major defensive statistical categories: rush defense, pass defense, and scoring defense. They may have the best offense in the NFL, but they are the duality of man in that their top-rated offense in so many categories is held back in a lot of ways by a bottom-rated defense virtually across the board. If Sean Payton and the Broncos cannot find a way to effectively control the clock, win at the line of scrimmage, and run the football against the Dallas Cowboys, the opportunity and faith and hope in them to do so going forward is going to take a significant step backward. And I think, frankly, given the high-octane nature of the Cowboys offense, it's going to be pivotal for the Broncos to do that if they want to have a hope at keeping pace. Because let's not pretend like this Broncos offense has been competitive in consistent enough stretches to be able to look at them and say they can keep pace with a team in a shootout. Yes, they won against the Giants 33-32, and all of their points were condensed into a fourth quarter, but they were down 19-0 going into that fourth quarter, and they still allowed some defensive lapses in that fourth quarter that made them have to catch up even further offensively. The Giants defense gave the Broncos offense everything that they could handle for 3 quarters and change of that game. If that game script plays out again against the Cowboys, who are significantly worse than the Giants in terms of rating, pass defense, rushing defense, and scoring defense, this Broncos offense has not given faith that they can keep up with an even higher scoring, high-flying offense. If Sean Payton and the Broncos offense are unable to run the football against this bottom-rated Cowboys defense, I'm not 100% sure when they will be able to, with any vote of confidence, going forward. With the Colorado Avalanche, we got a jersey matchup that is, frankly, an all-timer. You have the throwback Quebec Nordiques against the throwback Hartford Whalers, 2 of the most aesthetically pleasing and visually stunning NHL uniforms in league history, clashed last night, and unfortunately, it did not go the Avalanche's way. They lose once again in a shootout, stacking a point as they continue a strong start to the season. They still have not lost in regulation, but they were unable to capitalize on overcoming a 4-1 deficit in the first, essentially 12 minutes or so of hockey, where we saw Scott Wedgwood, who has been nails for the most part to start the NHL season in 2025, give up 4 goals, including a shorty right before getting pulled. And Trent Miner coming in relief with 20-plus saves to be able to help will the Avs and their offense back into the game, and then ultimately falling short after the overtime period in a shootout. Interesting shootout, too, as you see Brock Nelson, Arturi Lehkonen in the lineup with Marty Necas to shoot the puck. No Nathan McKinnon or Cale Makar. And I find that interesting and worthy of discussion because, yes, you can say that a shootout setting is not true real hockey. And so maybe it's a specialized stylistic skill set that you're looking for that changes goalie to goalie, tendency to tendency, and night to night, depending on how guys are skating. But there's also a part that says, hey, man, let's not overthink this. Are Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar 2 of the 3 or 4 best skaters and scorers in the National Hockey League? My answer would be yes. And so I don't think I would have looked sideways at Jared Bednar and company putting those players in those positions to try to make a play. Maybe the result would have been the same. Nathan McKinnon's history in the shootout and Cale Makar's maybe isn't something that jumps off the page as overwhelming evidence as to why they should be in that regard. But I think sometimes we overthink things. And putting those guys on the bench in a situation where you've got to have it just feels like something that maybe in hindsight I would have done differently. On Scott Wedgwood, clearly his most uncharacteristically poor performance of the season, given the way that he started his first handful of games in injury relief of Mackenzie Blackwood, who will not make the trip with the Avs, meaning that his return is going to have to wait just a little bit longer beyond their road stand. And Trent Miner is likely going to get a start in the next game for the Avs to give Wedgwood, preventing him from going back-to-back there between the pipes. But the Colorado Avalanche seem to have an officially confirmed, can't ignore it, and I don't want to hear everybody in the mentions talking about blowing it out of proportion and this and that, this and that. The Avs were 1 for 8 on the power play last night. They're struggling to get off more than 2 shots per power play attempt this season. And I think they're 4 for 31 on the power play as a whole in this season. Their conversion percentage is terrible. Valerian Nichushkin was able to push a goal through, his second goal of the night on the power play in this past game. And it starts to make me wonder, does Val need to be put back on the top power play unit? Or better yet, given how poor the Avs have performed on the power play dating back to last season, when it was essentially what kept them from beating the Dallas Stars in round 1 of the postseason last year, and how it's carried over into this season, do they just need to kind of shake up the game board and maybe throw some bottom 6 guys in there who can maybe spark something? You know, you got Gavin Brindley, who shows promise as a skater and a shooter, Victor Olofsson and company, Jack Drury. Do those guys need to get more run and shake some things up? Because frankly, if the power play continues at this poor of a conversion rate for the Avalanche, it's not something that is going to go away or be ignored if and when this Avalanche team struggles in periods, in games, or in stretches of a season, certainly in a postseason, where those conversions are going to be relied upon the way they were against Mikko Rantanen and the Dallas Stars. It does appear to be an exposed flaw and weakness for the Colorado Avalanche. And frankly, it defies science. The Avs are such a good skating and shooting team at even strength, specifically in 5-on-5. And for some reason, with a man advantage, that just goes away. I don't know if they're getting too cute and trying to move the puck, tape to tape and get clever and creative with some wraparounds and things like that, instead of just focusing on the relentless shot-forcing pressure that was a hallmark and staple of their offensive identity in the year they won the Stanley Cup in 2021, 2022. And so if maybe they're getting too cute, maybe there are defensive mismatches and opportunities that teams are finding ways to exploit. But the collection of talent that exists on the top power play line, and frankly, even the secondary power play line, for them to have the conversion and success rate that they do with a man advantage, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I would love someone who's more nuanced with the game of hockey than I am, perhaps, to try to explain that to me. Because to be honest with you, I'm kind of at a loss for words. That being said, because I certainly don't want to end on too negatively a note when it comes to the Colorado Avalanche, I still think this team is going to be a force and a wagon in the regular season. Doesn't mean that they're without fault or flaw in games, periods, situations, etc. throughout the season. And it's not like this conversation, at least not I think, is going to go away. Scott Wedgwood has been amazing to start the NHL season for the Colorado Avalanche. So much so that there's been legitimate talk and conversation about whether there's a goalie controversy brewing within the Avalanche organization. Something that, can you imagine us talking about that a handful of years ago? No. That is a almost a backhanded good thing that's happened to the Avalanche, that you have 2 goaltenders that can perform at the way that they've each individually performed. But I think this performance last night, which I expect Scott Wedgwood to bounce back from, is an indication that it's been great and the Avs have been fortunate, and Wedgwood has been nails in a lot of situations when called upon to do so, and will be called upon in the future, near and far, this season to do the same. But this Avalanche team is going to benefit greatly from Mackenzie Blackwood's return, in my opinion. And I think that will give them a nice wind and lift of the sails to push into, the opening third of their NHL season. The power play's got to be figured out. There could be a conversation coming up about Gabe Landeskog and how his potential performance and load management strategy may unfold. We saw the Avs call up 2 players from the Colorado Eagles, a forward and a defenseman, in preparation for this road trip, which could mean that Gabe sits down a game in the near future, and that'll be something that we continue to monitor. But all in all, 2 disappointing endings for the Nuggets and the Avalanche last night in 2 pretty high-profile potential postseason matchups. In the Avs case, it would be a Stanley Cup preview. In the Nuggets case, hell, the way it played out for the Warriors last year, that could be a first-round matchup in the NBA postseason of the Western Conference. And we will hope that the Denver Broncos and perhaps the Colorado Buffaloes coming off a bye against a Utah team that is significantly improved from last season, can continue to push forward with the hope that they can salvage a season that has maybe different expectations now than it did when college football kicked off about 2 months ago. Want to give a shout out on the way out to our friends at Denver Regenerative Medicine. Guys, if weight loss has been a struggle for you, it's time for something real. At Denver Regenerative Medicine, they use full-strength GLP-1 medications with doctor oversight. You can start today with a free consultation and get real results for under $300 a month. Book now at denverregen.com. That's going to do it for a Friday edition of today's show. Thank you all so much for joining me. As I mentioned off the top, like and subscribe to our Denver Sports 1043 The Fan YouTube channel. You can catch all of our digital, live, and recorded content. Shows like this one, The Rundown, From the Nosebleeds with Joey and Trent, Mile High Hoops, Mile High Hockey with Jake Shapiro and Will Peterson back in full swing. And, of course, Orange and Blue Today with Andrew Mason and Cecil Lammy. And that doesn't even begin to touch all of the fantastic short-form and long-form video content from our radio shows and our wonderful lineup at Denver Sports 1043 The Fan, as well as the litany of written content available for your consumption at denversports.com about every one of your Colorado teams across the Front Range and beyond. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday afternoon, and we will catch you on Monday at noon for the Rundown.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.